All right, so let's get going. Today we're talking about managing inventory and software metering with Microsoft System Center Configuration Manager. Today we're going to give you an overview of inventory collection, configuring hardware inventory, software inventory, and managing the inventory collection, configuring asset intelligence, and configuring software metering. So let's start with what is a inventory collection. Okay. So inventory collection is the process of gathering information that describes the hardware and software installed on a client computer. So it's configured using the client settings for the hierarchy or the assigned on a per collection basis. So if you look at this picture, what this is showing you is that this is the configuration manager, and you've got all these client computers with the client software installed, and they're reporting back the inventory data for hardware, software, and obviously the asset intelligence, and they're feeding back into the System Center Configuration Manager. And basically now from this, we have an idea of what the hardware, software of the collection. Okay, so this could be part of the same collection. Could be part of the client connection, or they could be part of different collections. So if you look at the icons here, one is a desktop computer, one's a laptop computer. So one might be a part of a collection called desktops. Another one could be mobile PCs. So we can configure our collections as we like. So some of the management tasks that use inventory data, so the use of hardware and software inventory data include, so basically, how do we use that information that we're collecting here? We use it, we can use it when we're building queries. So queries is like a question. So if you remember, Configuration Manager uses a database. So when we create a query, we're really asking a question of the database. So we can ask a question or build a query based on the hardware configuration or software installed. So for example, a query could be which computers have a battery? Okay, so obviously if you have a battery, you're probably a mobile device like a laptop, like a Surface Pro tablet or something like that. Okay. So which devices have a battery? And based on that, we could configure for example, the power saving modes of that device based on that, rather than a general power mode for all computers across the collection. We could use also building collections on the basis of query inventory results. So that's similar to what I just said just then. We can build a collection of mobile devices based on the fact, asking the question, does the device or client have a battery? We can also use this inventory data to create reports, display hardware configuration, or install software. So for example, if we wanted to know which computer had Adobe Photoshop on it, so we could actually, based on our information that we've gathered from the client's software inventory, we can actually create a report on exactly knowing which computers have that piece of software or hardware on them. And obviously that would give us a better view of actually how we're how our licensing, it could be used in licensing as well, if you remember. So that's one of the risks of automatically deploying software, is that you might end up deploying the software on more computers than you actually have license for. So using these reports as one method, we could actually display how many instances or how many computers has, for example, that Adobe Photoshop installed. We could use it to maintain corporate standards. Okay, so again, we could actually query the computers to see if they've comply to the corporate standards. We could use it for troubleshooting client problems, and we could use it for collecting files. So that's for the software inventory. So that's where we actually get files specifically out of each of the computers. The process of inventory collection. So we view the inventory information at a site after its database has been updated by this process. So if you look at this, we've got the site server database server, the site server, the management point. So the client, remember, interacts with the management point, and that's where it gets instructions from, and that's where also it reports back to. So the clients get settings and collection inventory, and delivers deliver data to the management point. The management point delivers data to the site server, and then it updates to the database. So all this, don't forget, that's what the SQL database is for storing all of these configuration information as well as specific inventory information or any information at all that we're collecting or using. So for us, for our scenario, all of that is on the same computer, the site server, but potentially it could be on many computers. So, and basically then the fifth step is to replicate to all central administration sites. So basically, obviously, if we have more than just these servers, then they'll be replicated. How is hardware inventory collected? A hardware inventory obtains information by querying. So for those of you who've done the 4IMWS subject with me, you would already know about the WMI. Okay, WMI. So basically, the WMI is a way of actually getting information or querying the operating system or the system itself. So we can, with Windows, we can use the WMI database on Windows client computers. From the WMI, we can actually get any of this information that's in the system that you can see in the system information utility. But except that obviously this is displayed with the system information, but the WMI database is on each client, and you can see it's got hardware resources. Okay, it's refreshing the system. It's probably because it's updating the query of the to the database. IRQs, so memory. Then we can look at the components, audio devices. We can see what drivers and stuff like that, and so forth. Okay, so network. If we look at the adapter, we can see that that's got various adapters there, and basically it contains a lot of information. We can even see the software environment. We can look at system drivers. We can look at the environmental variables, our programs groups, and loaded modules. So basically, what I'm trying to say is this contains a lot of information. Each of this information is on every one of our computers. If they're Windows computer, it's already there. Okay, it's already there. It's sitting there. It knows about itself. Okay. So how do we get the hardware inventory then? It obtains the information by querying the database on the Windows client. So basically it's already there, and the system configuration server uses the WMI database and queries it. So CMI database named OMI on Linux, Unix, and Mac OS. So basically similar idea. We use this on these type of clients, but like we said before, you know, our functionality or our abilities on a Windows computer is far more greater than on a Linux, Unix, or Mac computer. Even though we've said that we support Mac, it supports Mac, it supports Linux. It's when we say support, it's really limited as we've been talking about across the different topics. The hardware inventory agent collects an initial full hardware inventory and then subsequent delta inventories. Okay, so I think we've used this term before. Does anyone understand what delta means in IT? Guys, there's 7 of you in the class. Does anyone know what delta means? I think we've discussed this. I'm not sure if it's with this group or with another group. Yeah, I think it was this group. So Sakraj says differential changes. Exactly right. All right, so exactly right. Good one, Sukraj. So a full initial hardware inventory. So that's when the client becomes available. It's installed onto the client. The client software is installed on the client system. It reports, collects all this information, reports back to the configuration manager, and that rarely changes. Okay, the hardware inventory, as you know, just take your computer hardware at home. It rarely changes. Okay, there's some things like USB devices that gets plugged in, unplugged, and so forth. But overall, the hardware inventory rarely changes. So there's no point getting a full inventory every time. So this delta, which in IT and in science or in technology stands for differences or changes. Okay, so this is what Sukraj says specifically, differential changes. So what has changed from the full hardware inventory? So only those changes will be updated, will be collected and updated, which means a lot less work, a lot less traffic, a lot less data. So if we look at this, this is the default settings of your collecting hardware inventory, and you'll see this when we actually go work through the labs. You can see that there's here the hardware inventory, some default settings. Enable hardware inventory on clients, yes or no. Obviously, in this case, it's selected yes. And then this is the schedule. At the moment, it's configured to occur every 7 days, effective of 1970. Okay, that's a while back, but basically every 7 days. It doesn't need to happen every day. Like we said, hardware changes is not that common on a normal production computer that's sitting on your network. Obviously, time to time, yes. And this is the size of the file, and this is the different hardware inventory classes, and we can manipulate that if we wanted to. Extending the hardware inventory. So methods used to extend the hardware inventory, including modifying the default classes in the client settings. So that was here. So what classes do you want to capture? So there's some things that are more important than other things, but it's up to you what you choose. So modifying the default classes in the client settings, or connecting to a source computer and importing to import specific hardware inventory classes. We can import and export custom MOF files, and modifying the configuration MOF file. So these are the manifest files. How is software inventory collected? Similar way. So software inventory is, instead of collecting hardware information now, we're going to collect the software information. So this brings us to a good point. I want to just pause a bit. So if you remember in the assignment, we talked about a standard operating environment. Okay, so we talked about how each computer in this standard that has the standard operating environment will have a common operating system and common software such as Microsoft Office. If we take our classroom computer, our TAFE was Microsoft Office. We had Packet Tracer, we had VMware Workstation, we had Terminal Emulator, and we had a Notepad++, and we had a few other software. So basically, by using this software inventory, we could actually compare what we have on the system to our SOE, and obviously see if there's any differences. And obviously allows us to check that the SOE is actually there. Okay, so how does the software inventory get this data? They collect data directly from the files by reading the file header information. It can collect file systems details even from unknown files that may not have information in the file header. It can collect copies of files that you specify and store them on the site server. And you can enable you to view the collected inventory and file information by using the Resource Explorer, or just by viewing the software inventory information in the reports. And again, this is where you can configure exactly what you want to, how detailed or what you want to include. So to configure a new software inventory rule, you create a new inventory rule. You look at the file types, to type the file name or the variable, specify the location, specify whether to exclude encrypted or compressed files, specify whether to exclude files in the Windows directory, and you can specify reporting details. So basically, again, when we will go through the labs, it'll be you'll be doing some of this. Configuring file collection. So this is where we can actually get files from the client to the server. To configure file collection, we create a new file collection entry for the file. Type the name of the file that you want to collect. Specify the path to the file for which you to search. Specify whether to exclude encrypted or compressed files, and set the maximum file size. Okay, so this is getting files out of the client and onto the server. Initiating the inventory cycle on a client. So if you remember, when we go to the control panel of our actual system, you remember there's a configuration manager, and that brings up this. And if we go to the actions, then we can see there's a software inventory. I think there's a cycle. So this is where we can actually run now, and it sort of does it in the background and feeds that information back to the configuration server. There's your hardware inventory, and there's a whole heap of other things we can run now as well. But it's happening in the background once you click run now. So to initiate hardware inventory, software inventory, or file collection, so you can see that there was a file collection as well, file collection cycle. You can actually, select that cycle and tell it to run. Okay. No, initially the inventory collection, initiating the inventory collection manually is helpful for testing and demonstration purposes, but you typically do not need to do that because these are set to run at specific times and cycles. If you remember, we specify the schedule here. So normally you would not have to manually do this. And obviously we would do this in our lab because we can't afford to wait 7 days just in case it doesn't for it to happen. So we can actually tell it to run at that point in time. So there was a question. WasIf says, if we run the cycle, like client has access to it, if client press it again, does it initiate any busy thing? I don't understand your question, WasIf. Okay, so yes, you run it, and obviously that's a load on your client computer. You're sending the information after you run that cycle to the server. If you run it again, yes, you'll put some more load on your client computer and you'll send more information to the server. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. Okay, in the resource Explorer. Okay, so once all this information has been gathered, you have this thing on this tool on the configuration manager, which is called Resource Explorer. And from this, we can actually look at a specific computer, in this case, the London CFG, and then we can actually open up the information. And this is only one computer, obviously, and obviously if you have 20 computers or 100 computers or 1,000 computers, you could go in and explore each one of them. So for those guys who've done that IMWS subject, if you remember, we talked about inventory software, didn't we? We talked about third-party inventory software. We talked about how we manually collect this information. But now if we have the System Center Configuration Manager, we can actually gather this information from all of our clients, not manually from each computer and getting the data, or not even using a third-party software that you may have to pay for. This is part of the System Configuration Manager, and then we can actually use this to obviously create our asset register if we wanted to. Okay, so the WasIf goes on to ask, will the server be busy by the client computer as client computer user access to it? Well, the client computer is sending information to it. Is that what you mean? Because I think the biggest load in that process of running any of those manual actions is on the client machine more so than the server machine, because it's actually just sending a tiny bit of data after the cycle is run. Considerations for securing inventory collection. So consider implementing the following security options for client inventory reporting. So enable inventory encryption. So obviously there's always, anytime you have information and stored somewhere or can be accessible somewhere, there's a chance that it can be used to maliciously. So one of the ways we can do that is to enable inventory encryption, which means that if when the client computer is sending this information to the server computer, then all of that is encrypted. Okay, and we hopefully all you guys remember what encryption is. That's just to scramble up the data so no one can read it unless you have the appropriate key. So therefore, no one can actually just sitting on your network, also gathering those inventory data and getting information of your network and computers. We can disable the MIF file collection. So file collection, if you remember, we talked about just before. Anytime you can actually collect files or transfer data, that's a possible vector for getting information. So we can disable that. We should do, so do not use file collection to collect critical files or sensitive information. So that file collection is meant for collecting, really basic information. If you're using it to collect things like payroll data or something else that contains sensitive information, then that could be misused as well. And we can set a specific deletion interval for older inventory data and collected files. So what does that mean? It means that after a certain time, those older data or the collected files will be deleted. All right, troubleshooting the inventory collection. So inventory collection troubleshooting task. So like I said, there's the System Center Configuration Manager. It's all relies on logs. Okay, all relies on logs. So these are some of the client logs that's on the client computers. This is the site server logs, and this is the management point logs, and you can look at the status messages as well. So yeah, unfortunately, the System Configuration Manager, there's some graphical tools, but at the end of the day, when you want to get to the underlying troubleshooting, you'll have to rely on using a lot of these logs. And that's where it becomes a little bit boring, but hopefully we're using that CM trace item that we talked about before, it makes it a little bit easier. What about asset intelligence? So asset intelligence is obviously taking the information we're getting from the clients and then doing something with it. So we're extending the hardware inventory. We're able to use license reporting. So remember we said that one of the risks of deploying software automatically onto systems is that we might be inadvertently breaking our licensing agreement because it's just automatically installing it. But the licensing reporting hopefully allows us to double check and see if we are breaking it. So if we didn't have this automatic deployment, obviously we would be manually installing it, and hopefully when you manually install it, you'll be taking records of how many times it's been installed and so forth. But still, you can make mistakes and break your license agreement inadvertently. But this licensing reporting basically keeps your company from breaking these rules, or lets you have a mechanism to see if you are. So it supports the ISO, IEC tags, and we can also collect information about apps. Okay, so you probably never heard of this, but basically this is a virtual apps. So instead of so VApp or AppV, VMware calls it VApp, Microsoft calls it AppV, but it's essentially a group of computers or group of virtual machines providing a service or application service. So if you think about your Learn, you have a web server front end, you got a database in the back end to store student results, you got a content management system which has all the content like files and stuff like that, and you have authentication service. So that's really for different computers or different services working together to give you this Learn experience. This experience where this experience where you're able to log in to learn, access learning resources, do assessments, and submit tasks and all that kind of stuff. But all of that could be virtual machines, okay? And this app V basically groups all those virtual machines in a group of virtual machines, and we can manage them together. And basically, this asset intelligence allows us to collect information about these virtual applications that are running on several virtual machines. Some benefits of asset intelligence, the following benefits over software inventory. So you can have more accurate representation of software titles present on managed computers. Okay, so this improves this software inventory, the asset intelligence. Information about the license usage for a specific product rather than just information about the software itself. So that's important. Okay, so hint, hint, that was in our assignment, wasn't it? Some of the risks, some of the ways we can talk about minimize those risks or mitigate the risks. Asset intelligence retrieves information about the installed software through the hardware inventory client agent. Okay. And the asset intelligence catalog. So the asset intelligence catalog features includes more than 500,000 software titles. So we can have the software titles that we deploy or we're interested in. It enables import of software license information, so we can actually buy licenses, let's say from Microsoft, from Adobe, from anywhere you like, and we import that software licenses information into our asset intelligence, and then we can actually use that to actually see how many have been assigned and so forth. Provide information about hardware requirements for some titles. So as we know that the software has minimum hardware requirements, and obviously this hardware requirement is area allows us to work out whether the asset is capable of running this software title. This is updated periodically through the System Center online. So basically we can get updates online for this asset intelligence. Configuring data collection for asset intelligence. So configuring asset intelligence can include the following tasks. We can enable hardware inventory and software metering. Metering is a bit like giving people access to software and limiting access to software, or calculating how much access they have been using. We can also enable asset intelligence inventory reporting classes. We can enable Windows event log settings. We can import software licensing information. We can install asset intelligence synchronization points, and we can configure asset intelligence maintenance tasks and configure asset intelligence security. So let's talk about software metering. So like we said, metering is counting. Okay, if you go to a parking meter, for example, you are paying for the amount of time you are parking on that street, for example. Software metering is basically counting how much of that software is being used. Software metering is the process of gathering detailed data on program usage from a client computers in the configuration management site. So Sukrash says that we use software metering in upgrading Windows processes as well. Like we can discard those apps which have never been used. Yeah, that's the whole point of software metering. Okay, so basically, software metering allows us to look at software and how much they're being used. Okay, let's say we had Adobe Creative Cloud, and we all know that's pretty expensive. Okay, we have let's say we have 200 licenses for TAFE SA. So we think we're going to need it we think all IT students need it, and all IT classrooms need it, and all IT lecturers need it. So we deploy that software onto those computers. But the problem is each software license costs, doesn't it? And if we just deploy it on all those IT computers for students, for lecturers, then is that efficient use of allocation of those licenses? Okay, well, we don't know. Maybe we don't know initially who actually is going to use it or not use it. And even if people say, yeah, I'll use it, you know how it is. you're going to be asked, do you need this software? Everyone's going to say, yes, I do. I'm sure you're going to say if it's something that's you don't have to pay for, and people are going to ask you, do you need it? And you probably just say, yes, I do, just in case. And that's just human nature, a bit greedy. Okay, so but the problem is the company's paying for this. So if we're paying for 200 licenses and then we install it on all these computers for IT studies, and it turns out that classroom A103, classroom 104, classroom 204, 205, no one's actually using it. Or lecturer Alex Zhao, lecturer Greg Lynch, they're not actually using Adobe on their computers. So basically, the software metering allows us to gather information about the usage from the client computers. And you're right, Sukraj, if we work out that hey, it's not actually being used in 103, 104, and 204 and 205, maybe we can actually take those software off and minimize the licensing. Maybe instead of buying 200 licenses for all these computers, we can back that down to 100 licenses. Okay, so basically by doing this, we can reduce the cost possibly by buying less licenses, or we can minimize the cost by allocating the licenses to only people who actually really need it. Okay, so type of data collected, so program usage information, file information, program information. That's the kind of information we're going to be. So how software metering works. So basically, if this is monitored program, so let's say this is Adobe Creative Suite, VMware Workstation, and something else that we pay good money for. Let's say that's what will do in like, I don't know what we'll do like, I don't understand that question. Individual license, what about concurrent license? Can we measure? I don't understand your question, was it? Okay. All right, so basically licensing usually is how many instances, okay? And if you're talking about how many connections to a server, then that's on the server, isn't it? So if you're talking about how many connections to remote desktop, that's actually on the server that you configure the license. But we're talking about how many instances are they installed onto computers. So I'm not sure if that's what you mean by concurrent licenses. Okay, so I think when you talk about concurrent licenses, you're talking about how many connections. Okay, what do you mean by concurrent licenses? I don't understand what you mean by that. So is that concurrent licenses connecting to the service? Or are you talking about, what are you talking about? I don't fully understand your question. Maybe put it on your microphone and ask it. But anyway, getting back to here, so if we've got these programs that we worry about, VMware Workstation, we've got Adobe Photoshop, we've got something else, okay? So basically these are the client computers, they are installed on client computers. The software metering agent will be collecting information about this and then storing it and then sending it server, which sends it to the database. So when you enable software metering agent, so agent is another word for a bit of software that's installed onto the client client computer. It collects data each time a monitored program runs and terminates. It uploads that data to the management point on a scheduled basis, and which forwards that to the data to the site server and adds it to the database. So basically, every time someone turns it on, double clicks on that icon, turns on Adobe Photoshop, then it will collect that information and send it on. Well, okay, so I can't think of any software. I can't think of anywhere that is based on using it at one time. So it's more like instances installed on how many computers. Okay, so can you give me an example of where a software is measured on how many people are using it at one time? Because I from my understanding, let's say Adobe Photoshop, you're installing onto a number of computers, and that's what it's measured on. Each time you install it, you have to use up a license. Okay, are you talking about some applications when they're not used, they're not counted? I don't understand that one. Can you give an example? So we enable the software metering agent and configure the reporting schedule. Okay, so we can see how often they report. In this case, it's a custom interval every 7 days, but that's the same as weekly, really. And this is the time that's going to do it. We can create a software metering rule that navigates to the software metering node, create a new software metering rule, provide relevant information, and we'll do this in our labs, apply the rules to other sites if applicable. And when enables, metering will automatically generate disable rules from recent usage history and generate automatic rules based on the basis of specified percentage of computers using the program. Software metering maintenance tasks. So some tasks you have to do with the software metering. They can help manage collected data usage. You need some of these include summarize software metering tasks, summarize software metering file usage data, summarize software metering monthly usage data, delete software metering data, including delete aged software metering data, so old data basically, and deleting software metering summary data. So basically, with the software metering, it allows us to count and work out the usage of the software. Like I said, it's not efficient to just go buy more licenses when the licenses you have are not being used effectively. Let's say that we do install Adobe Photoshop into a classroom, but we don't schedule the classes in that classroom. So therefore, it's only used for one class a week, and then we need to install Adobe Photoshop into other classrooms because they're also being used to teach use Photoshop. That doesn't make sense, does it? So if we can use the software metering to work out that they're not being effectively used, that means maybe we should be scheduling all classes that need Adobe Photoshop into one class to make better use of the software than to have the software installed into multiple classes when you only use it, let's say once a week, one class a week. So that allows us to identify how software is being used. So like I said, you can't trust your users. Do you need to use Adobe Photoshop? Everyone's going to say, yes, 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 because it's something that they think they need. The human greed element comes out. But when it comes down to it, who actually is using it? All right, so you might have software on your computer that you hardly ever use. Should your company be paying for that license if you're hardly ever using it? It would be great if when you do need it, that you can use it, but to be honest, you could easily be switching to a computer that has it rather than needing it on every computer in the organization. So today we're going to work on that worksheet that, oops, where is it? The Manage Inventory and Software Metering worksheet. So that's what we're going to do for the rest of the class. I'm going to stop my presentation and I'm going to take the roll, stop recording as well.